"Dad, we need to talk about the house. Honestly, it's getting to be too much for you." Those were the words my son Colin spoke on a quiet Sunday morning in late October, standing in the kitchen of the house I had built with my own two hands over 30 years ago in Oakville, Ontario. He was holding a mug of coffee I had brewed. He did not look up from his phone when he said it. His wife, Diane, was sitting at the island, dragging a fork through her eggs with the slow, deliberate patience of someone who had rehearsed her silence. She had moved into my home 14 months ago. Both of them had, and from the way she glanced up at me over the rim of her glasses, just for a fraction of a second, just long enough to check my reaction. I knew this conversation had not started that morning. It had been building for weeks, maybe months, behind closed doors, in whispered phone calls, in the particular way she had started treating my living room like a staging area for her own furniture. I set the dish towel down on the counter and looked at my son. He was 51 years old. He had my father's jaw and his mother's eyes, and right now he had neither of their decency. I did not raise my voice. I did not reach for the back of a chair to steady myself the way old men do in the movies. I simply said, "Is that right?" Not a question, just a statement, flat and quiet. Colin finally looked up. He seemed relieved that I had not argued. That relief told me everything I needed to know about how little he understood the man sitting across from him. "There's a really wonderful place in Burlington," Diane said, producing a brochure from somewhere. Her lap, her bag, I did not notice. She slid it across the granite countertop. "Maplewood Gardens. It has a rooftop terrace and everything. They do aquafit on Tuesdays." I looked at the brochure. I looked at my son. I said I would think about it. They both exhaled at almost exactly the same moment. I excused myself, walked down the hallway toward my bedroom, and closed the door. And the moment the latch caught, I stopped being the tired old man they had written into their script. My hands were perfectly still. My jaw was set. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor, and I let the anger compress itself into something cold and precise, the way good lumber compresses under a proper load. By Thursday, they were not just going to lose me. They were going to lose every single thing they had gambled on taking. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this actually started. My name is Arthur. No, I'll stop myself. The names in this story matter, and I'll come to them properly. My late wife Carol and I bought the property in Oakville in the early 1990s, when the town still had the good sense to be modest about itself. I was a mechanical engineer by training but a builder by nature, and over 4 years of weekends and vacations I put up every wall in that house myself, poured the concrete for the foundation with 2 friends and a rented mixer. Framed the second floor the summer Carol was pregnant with Colin. She used to bring me sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and sit on an overturned bucket, talking to me while I worked. We were not wealthy people. We were careful people. There is a difference, and it matters. Carol passed away 9 years ago, in the spring, which is a cruel time to lose someone. She left me with a paid-off house, a vegetable garden she had tended for 20 years, and a son I was still proud of at the time. Colin had gone through a difficult stretch after his company restructured. He'd held a project management position at a mid-size manufacturing firm in Mississauga, and when the layoffs came, he was among the first to go. He and Diane had been renting a condo in Hamilton, a lifestyle they had built on 2 incomes that was, I would later understand, substantially beyond what one income could sustain. When Colin called me last September and said they needed somewhere to land while they got back on their feet, I did not hesitate. I told him to come. I cleared out the upstairs for them, paid the hydro and the groceries, and asked for nothing. 14 months later, he was handing me a brochure for a seniors facility. There are moments in life when you understand something completely in an instant, and rest of the time is simply confirming what you already that Sunday morning was one of those moments. I knew, sitting on the edge of my bed, that this conversation had not been casual. It had been constructed. Diane had found the brochure before the eggs were cold. Colin had chosen a Sunday because he calculated I would be soft, relaxed, off guard, in the particular mood that good coffee and morning light can manufacture. They had planned it together, in my house. Using my groceries and my electricity and my heating, they had sat in the dark and decided I was an inconvenience. I slept very little that night. The next morning, while they were both at work, Colin had found contract work. Diane had a part-time position at a real estate office downtown. I went to find my property documents. I kept my important papers in a filing cabinet in the small room off the kitchen that I use as a study. I have always been organized. Carol used to tease me about my color-coded folders. I pushed open the door to the study, reached for the cabinet, and found that the second drawer, the one containing my financial records, my mortgage discharge certificate, and the certified copy of my property deed, was jammed. I pulled harder. The drawer did not move. I looked more closely at the mechanism. Someone had pushed the lock pin on the side of the cabinet, the small brass tab that I had not engaged in years, and it had been pushed in so firmly that the latch had seated itself crookedly in the frame. It took me 20 minutes with a flathead screwdriver to free it. The drawer came open. The folders were there, but they were not in order. Someone had been through them, not violently, not like a ransacking, but carefully, the way you go through someone's things when you are trying to make it look like you haven't. A few folders were slightly out of alignment. The tab on the real estate folder was bent at a new angle, and tucked into the back of the drawer, behind a folder of old tax returns, was a business card I did not recognize. Prestige Mortgage Solutions. A handwritten note on the back said, "Call Gerald Ree, P.O., option." I stood very still in that small room for a long time. Then I put the business card in my shirt pocket, closed the drawer, and picked up the phone to call my lawyer. Her name is Patricia. I have known her for over 20 years, since she was a junior associate at a firm in Burlington, and I was navigating the paperwork around a commercial project that had gone sideways. She is 63 now and runs her own practice, and when I walked into her office on Lakeshore Road on Monday afternoon and placed that business card on her desk, she picked it up, read the handwritten note, and looked at me with an expression that did not bother to hide what she was thinking. "Tell me everything," she said. I did. I told her about the brochure, the conversation, the filing cabinet. I told her about the 14 months, the groceries, the utility bills, the dinner parties I had been quietly excluded from, when Colin's new friends came over, and the old flannel shirt I wore apparently did not fit the image they were building. Patricia listened without interrupting. She has that quality that the best lawyers share with the best doctors, the capacity to hear the thing underneath the thing. When I finished, she asked if I had noticed any new documents around the house, any papers left out, anything I might have signed recently without fully reading. I thought about it. 3 weeks ago, Colin had asked me to sign something he described as a household consent form for a home maintenance service. I had signed it. I had not read it carefully. Patricia's expression did not change, but she folded her hands on the desk. "I want you to go home," she said. "Act completely normally. Don't let on that anything is different, and I need 24 hours. I asked her what she thought was happening. "I think," she said, choosing her words with the precision of someone laying tile, "that someone has been researching a power of attorney strategy, and if they've used that maintenance consent form as a stepping stone, we need to move before they do." I drove home. I made dinner. I sat at the table with Colin and Diane and ate pork chops, and listened to Diane talk about a property listing she had shown that afternoon, and I smiled at the right moments, and I was, to all appearances, a perfectly content and slightly distracted 68-year-old man who had nothing more urgent on his mind than whether to watch the hockey game. Inside, I was building a demolition plan. Patricia called at 8 the next morning. She had run a quiet background check. Entirely legal, she assured me, through a licensed investigator she kept on retainer. What she found was not surprising in the way that a car crash is surprising. It was surprising in the way that a car crash you have been watching in slow motion for 300 meters finally arrives. Colin had been in financial trouble for longer than I knew. The restructuring that cost him his job had also, it emerged, triggered a clawback of a performance bonus he had already spent. He owed his former employer just over $14,000, a debt he had been making minimum payments on for 18 months. Diane, separately, had accumulated credit card debt across 4 different accounts. The combined outstanding balance was close to $78,000. The Hamilton condo they had vacated. They had not simply let the lease expire. They had been served with an N4 notice for non-payment before they left. They had not come to me to get back on their feet. They had come to me because my house was the only solid ground left within reach. I sat in my truck in Patricia's parking lot and stared at the steering wheel for a while. The worst part was not the debt. The worst part was the mental image of Colin, sitting across from me at my own kitchen table, using my Wi-Fi to research how to take my property, while I built the cabinet in the garage he had asked me to build because he said he needed more storage. I built it in 3 weekends. He was very grateful. He shook my hand. When I walked back into Patricia's office, I sat down and I told her that I was ready. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I told her I wanted to sell the house. She did not react dramatically. She made a note on her legal pad and said, "Timeline?" I said I wanted the transaction completed before the end of the week. Patricia, to her credit, did not tell me that was impossible. She said it would require a specific kind of buyer, and she thought she knew where to look. There is a particular category of real estate purchaser in the Greater Toronto Area, type development companies and land assembly groups that buy residential properties, particularly larger lots in established neighborhoods, for intensification projects under the province's housing policies. They do not need inspections in the traditional sense. They need a clear title and a willing seller. They pay in cash, and they close fast. She made several phone calls that afternoon, while I waited in the chair across from her desk. I listened to her speak in that level, unhurried voice she uses when she is being formidable without performing it. By 4 o'clock, she had a preliminary conversation established with a land development group operating out of Oakville that had been quietly acquiring properties along my street for the past 18 months. My house sat on a corner lot, larger than average, with good frontage. They had been waiting for it to come available. I gave Patricia full authority to negotiate. The call came at 9 the next morning. The group was prepared to offer $840,000 cash, closing by Friday, subject to a 2-hour walkthrough that afternoon. I said yes. I said that whatever I did not remove from the property by 9 o'clock Friday morning was to be treated as abandoned and handled at the developer's discretion. Patricia drafted the terms and sent them over by 10. There was one condition I added myself. The development company could not knock on my door, change the locks, or take possession in any physical sense until 9 o'clock Friday morning. Not a minute before. They agreed, noting it was unusual. I said I understood. I drove home. Colin and Diane were both out. I walked through the house slowly, not sentimentally, or perhaps sentimentally, in the way you earn the right to be when you have spent 30 years inside a set of walls. I ran my hand along the banister I had turned on a lathe in the garage. I stood for a moment in the kitchen where Carol used to stand, and I allowed myself 1 full minute of grief, and then I was finished. I went to the garage and started organizing what I was taking. The next morning, Wednesday, while Colin was making a point of being cheerful over breakfast, he had the loose, relieved energy of a man who believes the hard part is behind him. I told him my joints were acting up, and I had a physiotherapy appointment downtown. He offered to call me a cab. I said I would manage. He nodded and went back to his phone. I did not go to a physiotherapy appointment. I went to see Patricia for the final documents, and then I spent 2 hours at a storage facility on Trafalgar Road where I had rented a unit the day before, verifying that the professional moving company I had quietly hired for the following morning understood the precise scope of what they were to take and leave. I gave them a detailed list. Carol's sideboard, my father's workbench, the oak bookshelves from the study, the toolboxes, the filing cabinet, my clothes, my books, and the lockbox from the closet shelf. Everything else I left. I also made one other call on Wednesday afternoon. Patricia had gathered the account information for the collection agencies pursuing Diane's outstanding credit card debts. I contacted the largest of the 3, a firm called Meridian Credit Recovery, and identified myself as the homeowner of the property where the account holder resided. I informed them that the debtor would be vacating by Friday morning, and that I was prepared to grant them access to the property on Thursday evening to identify and document any assets that might be subject to recovery. The woman on the other end of the line had the voice of someone who had heard every possible variation of this kind of call. She verified the address, confirmed Diane's account status, and said a team could be there by 6. I thanked her and hung up. Thursday passed slowly. I kept to my routine. I cooked, I watched the evening news. At dinner, Colin mentioned that they were thinking of repainting the living room in the spring. He asked my opinion on a warm gray versus an off-white, with the comfortable confidence of a man who assumes the question is theoretical. Diane said she thought they should open up the kitchen wall to create more of a flow. I said, the warm gray sounded nice. I said the kitchen wall was load-bearing, and they would need a structural engineer before touching it. They exchanged a small look, the kind of look couples exchange, when they believe the older person in the room has just demonstrated his limitations. And I let them have it. At 8:15 Thursday evening, I told them I was tired and going to bed early. I closed my bedroom door and sat in the armchair by the window. At 6 o'clock, while I was pretending to sleep, the credit recovery team arrived. I heard the doorbell, heard Colin's confused voice, heard the particular quality of silence that follows an explanation that does not make sense the first time you hear it. I heard Diane's voice, sharper, and then the lower, steadier voices of the recovery team explaining the legal basis for their visit. The account documentation, the outstanding balances, the voluntary access I had authorized as the property owner. I heard them moving through the house. It took about an hour and 40 minutes. The television in the living room, purchased 18 months ago on a credit card, that had not seen a full payment since last February. The sectional sofa. 2 of Diane's handbags that were on the manifest. Recent purchases, their tags still on file with the original retailer, financed and defaulted. A laptop. A tablet. A coffee machine that cost more than my first car payment. At some point, Diane knocked on my bedroom door. Her voice through the wood was not the voice of a woman asking for help. It was the voice of a woman who has just seen something impossible happen and has not yet figured out what to do with her hands. Arthur, she started, then stopped. Then said, "What did you tell them?" I did not answer. I heard her stand there for a moment. Then I heard her walk away. By 8:30 the house was quiet again. I could hear Colin and Diane talking in low, urgent voices in the kitchen. I could not make out the words. I did not need to. I set my alarm for 5:30. Friday morning broke gray and cold, the way late October mornings do in southern Ontario when the lake hasn't decided whether to cooperate. I was dressed and in the kitchen by 5:45. The movers arrived at 6 on the dot. 3 men in a white truck who worked with the kind of efficient, unhurried competence that told me they had done 100 of these before breakfast. I walked them through the house with the list. They wrapped Carol's sideboard in heavy blankets. They disassembled the workbench in the garage. They loaded the oak bookshelves and the filing cabinet and the toolboxes without comment or question. Colin came downstairs at 7:15, still in his pajamas, and stood in the kitchen doorway looking at the 3 strangers carrying boxes out of his father's house. "What's happening?" he said. It was not quite a question. His voice had that quality I remembered from when he was very young and had done something he knew was wrong and was calculating whether to admit it or brazen it out. I looked at him across the half-empty kitchen. "I'm moving out, Colin. That's what you wanted, but..." He looked at the movers, at the gaps on the walls where pictures used to hang. "Where are you going? Why didn't you tell us?" "You told me it was time," I said. "You were right. It was." He stood there. He did not say anything else. I think he understood then that something had shifted, but not yet the shape or the size of it. I signed off on the mover's inventory at 8:45, handed the foreman an envelope with a tip inside, and shook his hand. I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The study, the kitchen, the front hallway where Carol had hung a watercolor of Georgian Bay that I was now taking with me. Then I walked out the front door with my 2 bags, got into the hired car waiting on the street, and did not look back. At precisely 9 o'clock, Patricia's contact at the development company arrived with a representative and a certified copy of the purchase agreement. They knocked on the door, Colin answered. I know this because Patricia was monitoring the process, and because Colin called me 4 minutes later. I let it ring. I was already on the Gardiner, heading east toward the hotel Patricia had recommended near the waterfront in Toronto. It was the kind of hotel I had looked at on the internet once, years ago, when Carol and I were talking about a weekend away that we never quite managed to plan before she got sick. A corner suite on the 14th floor, looking out over Lake Ontario. I had booked it for 2 weeks, paying in cash from the trust account Patricia had established for the sale proceeds, where the money was sitting safely insulated from any legal action Colin might attempt. I set my bag down. I stood at the window and looked at the lake. My phone rang again. I looked at the screen. Colin. I answered it this time. His voice had passed through panic and arrived somewhere that was harder to name. It was the voice of a man standing in a house he has just discovered is not his. Dad. His breath was ragged. There are people here. They're saying they own the property. They have papers. Diane's stuff is, some of her things are gone, and there are people here with papers saying they bought the house. Where are you? What did you do? I looked at the lake. A freighter was moving west, very slowly, just at the horizon. I did what you asked me to do, I said. I moved out. You can't sell the house without. Dad, we live here. We have rights. You can't just. It is my house, Colin. My name is on the deed. My name was always the only name on the deed. I paused. I also want you to know that I found the business card from Prestige Mortgage Solutions. I found the note about the power of attorney. I found the file you had been through. Silence. Patricia has already spoken with a lawyer at the Ontario Securities and Property Fraud Division about the maintenance consent form. Whether that goes further is not yet decided, but it is documented, all of it. More silence. In the background, I could hear Diane saying something I couldn't make out. Her voice was high and tight. Dad, Colin said, and his voice had changed. The calculation was gone. What was left was something younger, something I recognized from a long time ago and wasn't sure what to do with anymore. I'm sorry. I need you to know I'm sorry. We were drowning, and I didn't know how to ask you. I thought if you went somewhere comfortable and I could get things sorted. I know how it sounds. I know. Please. We have nowhere to go. I thought about the 30 years of mortgage payments, the lawn mowing money I taught him to track in a small green ledger when he was 9 years old, the 14 months of groceries and hydro, and the cabinet I built him in 3 weekends. You have the money from Diane's salary this month, I said. You have Colin's contract payments. You have enough to rent something modest while you figure it out. That's what you told me you needed 14 months ago, and I believe it's still true. The fraud question. Is Patricia actually? That depends entirely on what happens next, I said. If you cooperate with the transition, answer the development company's questions, and leave the property clean and on time, Patricia will advise me that pursuing charges is not in my interest. If you do anything else, it becomes her call. Another long silence. Okay, he said finally. It was a very small word. Goodbye, Colin. I set the phone down on the window ledge. The freighter was still moving very slowly, and the lake was very wide, and the light on the water was the color of something that does not have a name. That was 8 months ago. I am sitting now in a rented house in Kelowna, British Columbia, on a Tuesday in June, with the window open and the smell of something green coming in from the orchard next door. Carol always wanted to see the Okanagan. We planned that trip 3 times and it never happened. I am here now, in a house small enough to feel like a house and large enough to feel like a life, and in the evenings I sit on the back porch with a glass of wine from a vineyard that is a 15-minute drive away, and I watch the light change on the hills, and I am, without any performance or effort, at peace. Patricia tells me the development company broke ground in March. The house is gone. What Colin and Diane have done with themselves since then I genuinely do not know, and this is not the careful avoidance of a man who is angry. It is the honest answer of a man who has set down a weight and does not miss carrying it. I grieved for my son. I grieved the version of him that used to sit next to me at the kitchen table with a green ledger and look up at me like I was the person who knew how things worked. That version was real, and losing it is a real loss, and I do not minimize it. But the man who slid a brochure across my kitchen counter and looked relieved when I didn't argue, that man made his own choices. I did not make them for him. I only refused to absorb their consequences on his behalf any further. There are people who will say I was too hard on him. There are people who will say that family forgives family, full stop, regardless of the knife and how deep it went. I respect that position. I do not share it. What I know is this: you can love someone completely and still understand that keeping them from the consequences of their choices is not love. It is something else. It looks like kindness from the outside. From the inside, it is a slow erasure of yourself, a gradual agreement to become smaller, so someone else can expand into the space you leave behind. I am 68 years old. I built my own house with my own hands. I am done becoming smaller. If you have ever had to make that choice, the choice to hold the line even when holding, it costs you something real. I would genuinely like to hear about it in the comments. And if you believe that respect has to be maintained even in the hardest moments, even when it is inconvenient, even when the person you are dealing with is someone you raised, subscribe, because that is what we talk about here. I am going to pour another glass of wine and watch the light change on the hills. That is enough for now.